Greetings, Training for Translators listeners. This is Corinne McKay with episode 17 of the Training for Translators podcast, in which we're going to talk about the strange question, what if you've never really been a freelancer? But first, a little bit of shameless self-promotion. Have you yet read my new book, Getting Started as a Freelance Interpreter? Essential Strategies for Launching and Growing Your Business as a Spoken Language Interpreter. It is out now everywhere books are sold. The best way to purchase any independent author's book is directly from us. So if you go to my website, trainingfortranslators.com, and under the resource store tab, you go to the bookshop, you can purchase the print or electronic editions there. But you can also purchase it directly from the publisher, that's lulu.com, with worldwide shipping, same prices, or anywhere books are sold. And I will mention that the book so far has only 5-star reviews on Amazon, exclusively 5-star reviews on Amazon, including people saying this is a must-have for anyone who is curious about the interpreting profession or those getting started as an interpreter. If you are completely bilingual, Corinne McKay's new book can help you get started as an interpreter. Or beautiful writing with lots of practical advice. This step-by-step guide is a must-read for anybody curious about a career in freelance interpreting. So I'm going to be launching a virtual book tour in September, but so far the book is selling really well. I'm excited about it. And again, the title is Getting Started as a Freelance Interpreter. Okay, let's move on to this episode's topic, which is, what if you have really never been a freelancer? This is based not on a blog post, but on a post that I wrote for LinkedIn that sparked a lively discussion, more than 200 responses to it. You can see it on my LinkedIn profile. I'm just Corinne McKay, Corinne, if you'd like to look at it there on LinkedIn. This is a topic that I have been thinking about and talking to other freelancers about, sort of why, and I mean this in a genuinely curious way, not in any way to be judgmental. Why is the current business environment in which a lot of translators, and here I'm talking primarily about people who do written translation, not so much interpreting, but why is it so difficult for so many translators to adapt to this new working environment in which really most translation agencies have shifted to machine translation with post-editing, and really the path forward for most translators is to work with direct clients? Like, why is this so difficult for so many people? And we're seeing really every time I log on to LinkedIn, I feel like, it's one more person saying that they're leaving the language professions and doing something completely different. Well, I have a few theories there, but first, let's rewind the clock. I started freelancing in late 2002. So 2003 was really my first full year of freelancing. But at the time, my now almost 23-year-old daughter, yikes, was a tiny, tiny baby, small enough to sleep on my lap while I worked. So I was not working anywhere near full time. But as I've told the story many times, I applied to over 400 translation companies during my first year in business, largely using the American Translators Association corporate members directory, which I believe that 2003 was the last year that they sent that out on paper, like a phone book that they would send you in the mail, but it still exists to this day on the ATA website. I applied to over 400 translation companies, and within about 18 months, I had really a pretty steady flow of work. But where the breakthrough really came, and what relates to the topic of this episode, is that in the fall of 2004, When I had been freelancing around 2 years, but quite part-time, I went to the American Translators Association conference, which that year was held in Toronto, Canada, and I met a couple of large legal translation agencies who then became my, as we would say in US English, my bread and butter work, like the core of my business for years and years and years. And for one of them, they even had one legal case. The company has since been absorbed by a larger company, but it still feels a little bit weird to say the details, so I won't. But they had one legal case that I worked on for years and years and years. Now, here's where this relates to today's topic. I think that for a lot of translators, that is the business model that they continued until like 2022. So the beta version of ChatGPT came out in the fall of 2022. And I feel like probably within a year of that is where we saw this sort of cataclysmic shift in the translation industry start to really take hold. I think that if you are one of those people who for years or decades, or even since the 1980s, were working for a few agencies, that is why this new reality feels like a whole new world, because you never really had to run a business. You, in my assessment, were more like what we would call a fractional employee. So to me, that's sort of like you need a high level employee, not an entry level person. You need a high level employee, but you only need them part time. That's what we would call a fractional employee. You were more like a fractional employee who was paid as a freelancer, meaning you are not the crazy one. This really does feel like an entirely different way of doing business. So here is what I mean. In recent months, let's say the past like 3 to 6 months, I have talked to multiple freelance translators who have told me something like this. For the past however many years, I think a lot of the people I talk to, it's like 4 to 10 years, but some of them it's a lot more. I've been earning 75% of my income from 2 agencies. That's not an exaggeration. Sometimes it's 3 to 5 agencies, but I have talked to lots and lots of people who said, for the past 6 years, I've earned 80% of my income from 2 agencies. I really only take, one-off projects if they fall into my lap, but other than that, I'm just working for these 2 agencies. Now, those 2 agencies have done one of a number of things. One person told me those agencies have imposed a 40% rate cut. Many, many have told me they have switched entirely to machine translation with post editing, and they're offering me half of what I was effectively making when I was getting paid by the word. Now, this is my own podcast, so I can say numbers if I want to. Unlike when I speak at translation industry events, and you have to be a little more careful about how the organizers feel about that. But it's my podcast. I can say whatever I want. When I started working for these 2 large agencies in the early 2000s, my recollection is that they never paid less than 10 cents a word. And for a lot of work, they paid around 12 cents a word, meaning that once you started working, like I, already told you that I worked on, in fact, one legal case almost exclusively for several years, I was probably averaging 500 words an hour. So that's a pretty decent rate. And they had in-house proofreaders. So not saying that you ever want to send any client garbage, you don't. But when you know that your work is being backed up by an in-house proofreader, I sort of feel like, a pretty basic proofreading process on your own is okay, because the in-house proofreader is the one who is being paid to make this document publication ready. So already you are making, let's say $60 an hour. You're not getting paid by the hour, you're getting paid by the word. But I think back in those days, I was fairly consistently earning the per word equivalent of $60 an hour. Whereas now I talk to many, many translators who are being offered between $25 and $30 an hour to post edit machine translation. So even if they wanted to post edit 40 hours a week, which I don't really see how anyone could stand to do that type of work for 40 hours a week, because it's so mentally draining. At the end of the day, you don't even know like what sounds human and what sounds like computer speak anymore. Most of them, their income would decrease by half at least. Or these translators will say the other thing that my, two reliable agency clients are doing is sending me mostly minimum charge jobs that are not readable by their machine translation system. So they're saying, here's 65 words that the machine translation system couldn't read, or here's this one paragraph that is really blurry and can't be read by our optical character recognition system. And most of these people are saying, I just don't know what to do. Now, the hard part is that if you are in this situation, you are then going to get a fairly judgmental reaction, I think, from a lot of experienced translators who have been working with direct clients for a long time, either because we saw the writing on the wall, or because our businesses just led us there, or because we prefer it, or because we work in specializations that agencies don't handle. And I think my situation is a little bit all of the above. I kind of had the direct client epiphany probably, I don't know, more than 15 years ago when an agency client hired me to translate for an NGO, non-governmental organization that was an end client of theirs doing international development translation. And it didn't take me that long to realize they had huge, huge volumes of work, right? Funding requests, quarterly reports, annual reports, things to interface with donors, their in-country employee materials, job contracts, you name it. It didn't take me that long to realize, well, there must be NGOs that either are small enough that they don't really need to work with an agency, or they don't want to work with an agency. And after a marketing campaign to around 100 of them, I'm going to estimate that maybe this was in like 2007, I started having a pretty steady flow of direct client work. So the problem you're going to encounter if you are let's call you a fractional employee translator, that person who's been making 80% of your income from two agencies for 8 years, that then you're not going to find much comfort among experienced translators who are going to tell you, well, come on, just work with direct clients. Here's why it's not that easy. Because many people in that situation have been what I would call quote unquote freelancing. I'll get to the quotes in a minute. They've been quote unquote freelancing fairly successfully with a very basic set of tools. A Gmail address, or God forbid, Hotmail. They don't have their own domain name. They have a really basic LinkedIn profile, and that's it. They don't really have a network of other translators. They rarely go to language industry events. They've never gone to a client side event. And why? Because they didn't need to. Like, that's the truth. If you read the comments thread on this LinkedIn post, and a couple of translators messaged me privately to say, that's me. I was making $90,000 a year working for 3 agencies until 2023. I really think that when those of us who are experienced and work in the direct client market have that judgy reaction, we really shouldn't, because I think the truth is those freelancers didn't need anything more than that. They had those 2 to 5 agencies providing them with a steady flow of work and a decent income. And really, as I've said a couple of times before, but I think it bears repeating, they honestly were more like a fractional employee than a freelancer. And I also think as someone who is pretty steeped in the nitty-gritty of the language industry because of my past role on the American Translators Association board. So I was on the ATA board for 7 years. And I was the president of ATA from 2017 to 2019. And I say that not to brag about myself, but to say in those capacities, I really got to see kind of under the hood of the language industry. And, machine translation was always looming, right? It was always there on the horizon, and people saying it's getting better, it's getting better, it's getting better. But I don't think that many people, certainly not me, anticipated the rapid change that was going to follow the introduction of ChatGPT and friends. So I also think that a lot of people thought, If that segment of the translation market is going to be essentially decimated, surely we'll get some warning. And I think that in the grand scheme of someone's career trajectory, we really didn't. That it did not take more than like a year to a year and a half before these agencies that had been kind of dabbling in machine translation basically had very little what you might call pure translation work anymore. My colleague and friend Andy Ho is the one who I first heard use that expression, pure translation, which I think really speaks to, how those of us who started out certainly like pre-2015, what we did. You translated from a PDF into a Word document, let's say. I am saying this not in any way to be negative, but just to give some context to why this whole idea of just market to higher paying direct clients may be really foreign to a lot of people. As I record this, I posted this 2 days ago on LinkedIn, and it already has, like I said, more than 200 views and more than 50 comments. And most of the comments, people are totally free to disagree with what I'm saying, but I will note that most of the comments are agreeing with and adding to what I commented, and people adding some really interesting things. Like one person here says, I totally agree, and the volume of work being sent to freelancers is decreasing because a lot of in-house translation departments are now using machine translation plus post-editing. Most of the less important stuff is being translated by AI, less important, quote unquote. But here's really, to me, the rub. The people who said, I completely agree with you, and I think that a lot of us as freelancers are actually really reluctant to run a business. It's really different to have to put yourself out there, to have a website, to have to grow a network, to have to go to marketing events. But I do want to leave you with a bit of hope. First of all, a number of people on this thread commented, the great thing is that marketing gets easier the more you do it. And that's a comment from my ATA mentee, who is just incredible young up and coming translator. And a number of people saying, I have tried evolving and it is working. But the thing is, evolving is really hard. Like most people really don't deal that great with change, and evolving is very difficult. But I just think that I think that mindset right now is really important. And I think perhaps it helps you, whether you're experienced or a beginner, sort of wrap your head around this concept of maybe you have really never run a business in the way that a lot of solopreneurs do run a business, because you've never had to hustle for work. And as I commented to a number of people, I know that it is really tough, especially if you are losing work you really enjoy to AI. But I want to assure you, for example, this year, I am on track for my highest earning freelance year ever, and everything is stable. Translation and interpreting are both stable because my translation clients never cared about technology and still don't. They just want me to do the translation, and they don't really care. I don't want to say they don't care how it's done, but what they want is a good translation done on time and for what they perceive as a fair rate, and that work is still out there, but you're going to have to go find it. Okay, that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope you've enjoyed episode 17 of the Training for Translators podcast. If you like this podcast and you're not yet on my mailing list, you should be. Go hop on over to trainingfortranslators.com, and there's a sign up link to my mailing list at the bottom of the homepage or in the sidebar of any of the blog articles. If you click the blog tab, you can read more than 1,100 articles that I've been writing since 2008, and I hope you'll join us for a future episode. The podcast is hosted by me, Corinne McKay. It's technologically hosted on Libsyn, and I record it in Audacity using a Shure MV7 Plus microphone. Thanks. Have a great day.